let's see. She's the Assistant Attorney General, and she kind of gave a brief overview about the report. Um, and like 104 years later, and they determined that, hey, this was a rough situation. Um, it was planned, it was methodical. It's what they planned to do. Yeah, I don't even have the, I played it earlier in Roller Space. I don't have it now, but it's okay. We're still going to just get right into this. So this comes from the Civil Rights Division review and evaluation of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And this report was issued January 17th, 2025. Okay. Um, it's scathing. It's a scathing report. And the first question for me was, so what y'all gonna do about it? Um, I heard somebody say that there's like two more survivors left, and to my knowledge, I don't think that's how many are left. So hopefully, we'll get someone with some who has some knowledge, and they will be able to bring the facts in regarding how many survivors are actually left. So anyway, um, yeah, shout out to Rella One Love for being in the house. We always appreciate you, One Love Rella. Thank you for pulling up. Sent you a mic, and I'll send you the co-host, when you get a chance. Um, so yeah, the Assistant Attorney General, Kirsten, can't remember her name. Um, she gave a brief overview. This is a 127-page report. What I found, which most people maybe knew this, I didn't know that this happened on quote unquote Memorial Day, um, back in 1921. And I actually, date of incident is May 31st through June 1st, 1921. I actually don't know. I'm sitting at my desk in my office, so I kind of got this. Let's see, when was Memorial Day first recognized? I don't know if anybody in the room knows that. Uh, first recognized, first celebrated, 1868. So, well, they call that National Decoration Day. Well, that's why I need you on stage, baby, because you be having the answers, honey. But yeah, it looks like Memorial Day, first national observance of Memorial Day was in 1868. So that makes it even worse that this happened on Memorial Day weekend in 1921. That in and of itself shows that it was a time, because if Black Americans were doing what Black Americans typically do on Memorial Day, and we know why Memorial Day was created, then there's some irony to this event occurring when it did as well. So it's just no secret what the intentionality was regarding this. So I'm going to just be reading straight from the report itself. So I will be skipping around, but have any questions or any insight you wish to share, then by all means, we want to um, we want you to share that. So the following report the following is the issued report pursuant to a review and evaluation undertaken pursuant to the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act. And I'll just say this, like, you're using Emmett Till's name in vain if you are going to take action under this particular ancestor's name, as violent as his murder and assassination was, and then only just to come out and drop these salacious details, but not do anything about it. Yes, as she indicated, all of the people that had a hand in this are no longer living, but you still can cut a check because the Treasury Department is still fully functional. Okay. Um, I don't think the folks in Ukraine would have missed a little bit of something if you'd have peeled a little bit of some of those billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars up off of there. Okay, so let's really, really, really start there. Um, and then shout out to you, Rella. Thanks for pulling up. Appreciate you. Shout out to Funded Socially in the house. And 420, thanks for pulling up as well. Okay, so May 31st through June 1st, 1921 is the date of the incident.
Shout out to you too, man. I'm sorry I was sharing this space. Sorry.
Oh, no, no, no. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Cash gains in the house. Shout out to you. So, synopsis of review and evaluation. The government has reviewed the events of May 31st and June 1st, 1921, and issues this report to officially acknowledge, illuminate, and preserve for history the horrible ordeals of the massacre's victims. This report is the full first accounting of the massacre undertaken by the Department of Justice. And this is signed by Barbara K. Bosserman, Deputy Chief of the Cold Case Unit of Senior Legal Counsel. What took them so long, y'all? Let's be 100. The above numbered file has been closed as of this date, January 17th, 2025. So now it's closed. Now you know what it is. Are y'all going to take initiative and get with the program? Let's start there. Um, so we're going to go through and start with the executive summary because it's going to give us a basic overview, and then we'll kind of move around inside the further into the table of contents. One thing I really want to get to is race relations in America at the time of the massacre. So let me hit this executive summary, and here we go. On the night of May 31st, 1921, a violent attack by as many as 10,000 white Tulsans destroyed the thriving Black community of Greenwood, Oklahoma, a prosperous area often referred to as Black Wall Street. The attack, which lasted into the afternoon of June 1st, was so systemic and coordinated that it transcended mere mob violence. White men murdered hundreds of Black residents, burned businesses and homes to the ground, and left survivors without resources or recourse. In the aftermath, authorities failed to offer meaningful help and efforts to seek justice through the courts. Um, through the courts. And I don't know what this word is foundered, but we're just going to omit that. Seeking to understand and acknowledge the scope and impact of the massacre, the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, under the Emmett Till Unresolved Civil Rights Crime Act, recently announced that its cold case unit would review the events of 1921. From the beginning of that effort, it has been clear that no avenue of prosecution now exists for these crimes. The youngest potential defendants would today be more than 115 years old, and the relevant statutes of limitation have long since expired. Nevertheless, as the federal government's first thorough reckoning with this devastating event, our resulting review officially acknowledges, illuminates, and preserves for history the horrible ordeals of the massacre's victims. The review, conducted by the Cold Case Unit in the Civil Rights Division Criminal Section, involves speaking with survivors and their families, examining firsthand accounts, and studying primary materials, including an investigative report from June 1921 by the Justice Department's Bureau of Investigation, the precursor to the FBI. The agent's report, attached here on this report I'm reading as Appendix C, was prepared pursuant to an informal investigation. Took less than 1 week to research and write, characterized the triggering incident as a small and half-hearted attempt at a lynching, asserted that the riot was not the result of racial feeling, implied that Black men were ultimately responsible for the massacre, and concluded that its perpetrators had not violated any federal laws. Although flawed in multiple ways, the agent's report contains crucial information not discussed in other sources that describe the massacre. For example, it includes allegations that the law enforcement actively recruited white men from outside of Tulsa to participate in a raid on Greenwood. Our report therefore discusses the agent's 1921 findings at some length while identifying conclusions and opinions inconsistent with other sources. The trigger for this violence of the Tulsa Massacre was the kind of unfolded condemnation that, at the time, commonly justified unspeakable treatment of Black men. The allegations of a white man led police to arrest 19-year-old Dick Rowland for allegedly assaulting a white woman who operated an elevator he used. A local newspaper then sensationalized the story, and soon a mob of white Tulsans gathered outside the courthouse demanding a lynching. Black men from Greenwood came to the courthouse to protect Rowland. The white mob saw this effort to save Rowland as a challenge to their social order and quickly recruited others. The mob grew. A confrontation broke out, and when someone fired a shot, all hell broke loose. Violence escalated quickly. Local police deputized hundreds of white residents, many of whom had been advocating for a lynching and had been drinking. Law enforcement officers helped organize these special deputies, as well as other white Tulsans, into the martial forces that ravaged Greenwood. Over the next several hours, they looted, burned, and destroyed 35 city blocks while Greenwood's residents tried desperately to defend their homes. Some Black residents were shot or otherwise assaulted, and many were arrested or detained. Law enforcement actively participated in the destruction, disarming Black residents, confiscating their weapons, and detaining many in makeshift camps under armed guard. There are allegations that some members of law enforcement participated in arsons and murders. Contrary to the agent's 1921 report, the situation did not spontaneously grow out of control. Rather, what had initially been sporadic and opportunistic violence became systemic, yielding a much more devastating result due to coordinated efforts among white residents and law enforcement entities. Moreover, although the 1921 report asserts that the massacre, then called a riot, was not the result of racial feeling, perpetrators of the massacre overtly expressed and acted upon racial bias. As the fires of Greenwood, or as you were, as the fires consumed Greenwood, many Black families fled for their lives. White residents chased them across and beyond the city, taking men, women, children, the elderly, and the infirm into custody. The destruction of the district was total. The survivors were left with nothing. I'm pausing right there. Cash Gains, I see you're requesting to come up. You got the mic, Cash Gains. How you doing? Thanks for pulling up. Shout out to everybody in space. You, Alexis, Benjamin, Black. What's going on, Cash? All right. Well, all right. After the devastation, city officials promised to help Greenwood rebuild. But the white-led government of Tulsa not only failed to do so, but put up obstacles to residential reconstruction. White local leaders rejected outside aid, claiming they could handle the recovery, but then provided little to no financial support. Instead, claiming the area was best suited for industrial use, they imposed harsh new fire codes that priced residents out of the area, although a court later enjoined those provisions. Compounding the injustice, insurance companies denied Black residents of Greenwood compensation due to the riot clause in their policies. Legal attempts to hold the city accountable also failed. Black residents of Tulsa were left with no avenue for redress. The passage of time did not clear the path to justice. In 2003, victims' families sought compensation in federal court, but the statute of limitations had expired and their case was dismissed. In 2020, families made another attempt in state court alleging nuisance and unjust enrichment. That lawsuit also failed. This Justice Department review concludes that, had today's laws been on the books in 1921, federal prosecutors could have pursued hate crime charges against the massacre's perpetrators under hate crime laws, including the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act and the criminal provisions of the Fair Housing Act. The government could have prosecuted the destruction of Black churches under the Church Arson Prevention Act. Officers, public officials, and others who participated in the massacre could have faced charges for depriving Greenwood residents of their constitutional rights or for civil rights conspiracy. Many of these legal avenues, however, were not available then. Courts narrowly interpreted those federal civil rights laws that then existed, and although there were no shortage of bias motivated attacks, the existing law did not recognize them as hate crimes. Now the perpetrators are long dead. Statutes of limitations for all civil rights charges expired decades ago, and there are no visible avenues for further investigation. Furthermore, the Constitution's Confrontation Clause, which requires the government to provide live witnesses who can be cross-examined, presents an insurmountable barrier to prosecution. Despite yielding what will, for many, be a painful and dissatisfying outcome, this review of the Tulsa Race Massacre corrects the record. It recognizes and documents the trauma and loss suffered by the residents of Greenwood. Although legal and practical limitations prevent the perpetrators of the crimes committed in 1921 from being held criminally accountable in a court of law, the historical reckoning is far from over. Legal limits may have stymied the pursuit of justice, but the work to ensure that future generations understand the magnitude of the atrocity continues. Many of the matters reviewed by the Cold Case Unit involve systemic racism, state-sanctioned brutality, and the failure of government institutions to protect victims of color. Although this case reflects the same pattern, it was on a scale that multiplied the loss of life and extinguished an entire vibrant community. For the descendants that lost Greenwood, for the descendants of that lost Greenwood community, the fight for justice, while hindered by time and legal constraints, continues to seek truth and recognition. As anti-lynching advocate Ida B. Wells said, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." This report aims to do just that. I'm going to pause right there. Any comments? Anybody want to come up, share perspective? Rella, you still cooking? Are you there, Rella? Rella?
Yeah. I am here. I'm multitasking, but good. I am so I want to say that the thing that struck me the most is that you have a situation where at the time the residents that had moved into Greenwood, they were immigrants. And they were not identified as immigrants at the time. They, I think, used the term white resident. But when I actually did some research, the population of people that had moved into Greenwood were from the European countries. They were the first, not the first, but they were part of a segment of immigration whites that had came from across a distant land that they were let into the country. And I would surmise that these were the next generation that came off the heels of what we would know as the theft of sharecropping, during sharecropping, excuse me. As we see, there was always this concerted effort for the United States, particularly Oklahoma, to overpopulate an area that was heavily populated by Black Americans, for the benefit of transferring of resources. Okay. And I think in her submission of saying, well, they don't have people that are alive that they could actually bring justice to, I think that the justice should lay on the state itself, right. As well as the federal government, because two things happened. The state failed to protect its citizens, and the federal government failed to intervene during a domestic terrorist attack.
Okay, so let me pause you right there, Rella, because this episode is going to go on my YouTube, and so I know you got some good grown folks music in the back. Shout out to that space that we do.
I'm sorry. Let me turn it down.
Yeah, I just don't want YouTube to end up making me blot out key things that you're stating just because of the copyright thing or whatever. So anyway, I see Cash, and Funded on the stage. You guys got it. What's going on? Thanks for pulling up. Appreciate y'all. What's up?
Peace, man.
Hey.
May I ask before I do the submission what you were reading from?
I'm actually reading from the report that came from the Justice Department. Let me see here. I'll give you the official. It is it's from the Civil Rights Division. It's a review and evaluation of the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Excellent. First, I wanted to just point this out that so this is 1921 we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was looking up because you just mentioned how a lot of people were drunk, right? I was like, what time was Prohibition? Because I remember it was like 10, 15 years or something where it was illegal to be drinking.
Well,
that was in 1920, come to find out. So 1920, it's illegal to drink, and in 1921, drunk people destroy our home.
Well, not only do drunk people destroy it, but then they're also deputized, and the people and the sheriffs and stuff that deputized them knew they were drunk at the time of deputizing them. So, nothing is surprising.
You mentioned the fires consuming the homes. Mm-hmm. That just sounds spooky, familiar with recent events. Mm-hmm. The fact that you mentioned that it's civil rights, maybe legal people who wrote this, mm-hmm. and the fact that in a way they were kind of conceding that there's statute of limitations on civil rights. I've always thought that the concept of statute of limitations is I don't want to say evil. That's not maybe the best word, but I feel like it's in the best interest of the criminal that you pass a certain timeline or time date and that you're scotch free. Especially with the access to technology we have nowadays. And this wasn't slavery times. This was in the modern age where there's newspaper articles, photography, so on and so forth. The last thing I just wanted to bring up, and they mentioned the Fair Housing Act as well. I'm like, this needs to be told to lawyers who can look through that act and see exactly how they can be held accountable. But the point about living witnesses being a barrier to the truth, for lack of a better term, I feel like that and the statute of limitations point are kind of like two different ways that you lose, and you see that they win in allowing justice to be denied multiple generations. I don't know if you're going to get to it, but in my understanding, one of the judges who denied the initial claim reparations, his descendant, his granddaughter, was a part of this more recent denial at the state level. So it's just a continuation of the same things while saying, oh, it's too long ago, and that statute of limitations, and it was too long ago, no one's still alive to speak on it. I think that those are the excuses that they're making. We can all see what happened. Right. Thank you for the space.
No. Thank you, Cash. And just so what they were saying, so there are two, because that's what my question was at the beginning. And shout out to Trouble and everybody in the space. If you guys would share, it'd be great. There are at least two remaining survivors that did respond to this report. And I'll go ahead before it's all said and done and try to play that clip. But what the report was saying was that back in 1921, some of the laws that we have on the books now weren't in effect. Had they been in effect, then that was the recourse that they could have taken. They could have used the fair housing. They could have used, they could have used exercise the laws. They could have used them, but the real question is, would they have? Because none of those laws were on the table back then. The injustice is grave. It's no secret. And they still, there's no moral tick anywhere in them to say, you know what? We don't need a law to prompt and guide our behavior and our action and our response to this atrocity on American soil. And we're going to get to the part where, let me go back over, because we're about to get to the part where they talked about earlier about what happened is these white folks wanted to lynch this black man. Black men pulled up and said no to protect him, and all hell broke loose. And so we're going to get to some of the specific details about that. So give me just a moment. Let me get back over. I've been clicking all on the screens and stuff. Help me, Lord. Ooh, oh, Funded, you had your hand up. What's going on, Funded?
Hey, is there any way, because I'm, like Cash Gaines, I'm really interested in the statute of limitations. Mm-hmm. Because I'm curious if she is being what is it, the Department of Justice, where they're involved in investigation for criminal charges. Is she focused on the criminal charges part when she's talking about statute of limitations, or is she asserting that there would be no financial compensation because of this statute of limitations? Because that seems like it would be a stretch, being that that's not their area of expertise. So I kind of wanted clarity on that. If you could just like kind of reread the last part.
Sure. And it's sounding, and yeah, and I'll be happy to do that. And I did find the audio clip of her speaking, so let me get that set up. But it sounds like what they're saying is that they are not in a position to do any damn thing. But I'm going to reread it just so that those questions at least can be addressed. But give me a moment here. Well, let me go ahead and play this clip while I'm looking for this other deal here. So let's see. Y'all let me know if y'all can hear this clear.
Of insurmountable obstacles. We issue this report in recognition of the courageous survivors who continue to share their testimony.
Okay, so were you guys able to hear that clear? Because I'm in my office and I'm not in my little studio. Were you guys? Okay, good, great. Thank you, Cash. Um, I just hate that this is all they want to give us, which is just this, at least we're documenting it for history, you guys. Like, it's been documented for history. So that's really not, it's just not, that's not suitable. It's not enough. It's not enough. Let's see, give me a moment here. I'm gonna pull this report back up in order to continue reading.
And now,
Yeah, go ahead.
so she said it wasn't just a crazed mob, but coordinated violence against us by the state.
Correct.
And I think that's what you were just mentioning a minute ago as well, right?
Right.
That even though there were drunkards, it wasn't just some drunkards saying yeehaw to the back of their pickup truck. This is planes flying above. This is people, like you said, being deputized. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it changes what the rules are and then what laws apply to them. They're not just regular citizens anymore. Like, the one thing I want to compare this to, maybe not in the exact apples to apples ratio, but the Tuskegee experiment, right? In my understanding, in 1974, there was a payout for that, but it wasn't before it was admitted that even the president of the United States at the time knew that there was an experiment happening. Otherwise, they would have just said, it was something happening amongst our own community and not a coordinated assault by the government. So I just wanted to bring up that they've received cash payouts, and I don't understand how, with that case makes sense, and how the Emmett Till Act that they're speaking to doesn't apply in this case. Like, what does?
Right. So, and that's the thing that we talk about so much is the symbolism. You know, you've got this fiery name, you've got Emmett Till, and but there's no juice in the act. There's no juice in the act. It's just all a symbol. And I'm sure they had somebody came out there and shook the hand, received a piece of paper, and the juice and the authority of this Emmett Till Act is not worth the paper it's printed on because there's nothing they can do. And that's kind of like what they said in this executive summary that, you know, if the Emmett Till Act was in effect, they could have done something with it. Let me try to review this real quick, trying to find the answer to Black's question, which I think I forgot the specifics of it, Black. So my apologies. Are you?
It was towards the end. It was probably like in the last paragraph where she talked about statute of limitations. Because again, them being a legal law enforcement prosecutorial agency, I don't see how she could say that the statute of limitations for compensation in civil court, but that is a civil court issue. In the space that we had, we talked about equity courts, and in equity courts, statute of limitations isn't even a thing. The thing that they call it is called laches, but that's upon the defendant to prove that part. So the state clearly is on the hook based on them deputizing citizens, but then the federal government also on the hook. And I think what she said is in 2003, they brought a case to the federal government and it was declined due to statutory limitations. That likely was a civil law case. Mm-hmm. And again, I tried to reach out to that attorney. I had to post under his ex post because I'm not going to get a blue check to write him and DM him, and I don't know if he would respond to a DM anyway. Mm-hmm. But if they're going through civil law, then the thing that I essentially, the conclusion I came to in that space was that we need to start going after these cases in equity law and equity court, because that court deals with fairness and deals with restitution, and it has different rules than civil court. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. Statute of limitations, they control it. It's an artificial barrier. And they need to really, someone needs to have a case where they make that argument the point of the argument, because they keep removing statute of limitations for other groups, the Holocaust survivors, victims of pedophilia. Right. And I'm sure there's a whole host of other areas where they remove statute of limitations. So it's not a true barrier. It's not something that's written in stone. They can remove it whenever they choose. So they shouldn't even, they really need to stop bringing that up. And we need an attorney who can make that argument in court. Yes, I agree. And I caught that in your, the other space that you had, I think it was on Friday, Black, there, you had brought that up. And so to answer your question too about the statute of limitations. So what she says here again is from the beginning of that effort, we're talking about the cold case unit would review the events. Well, let me start here. Seeking to understand and acknowledge the scope and impact of the massacre, the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, under the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act, recently announced that its cold case unit would review the events of 1921. From the beginning of that effort, it has been clear that no avenue of prosecution now exists for these crimes. The youngest potential defendants would today be more than 115 years old, and the relevant statutes of limitation have long since expired. Nevertheless, as the federal government's first thorough reckoning with this devastating event, our resulting review officially acknowledges, illuminates, and preserves for history the horrible ordeals of the massacre's victims. Two things: murder. If they really wanted to get jiggy, they could come through with that. And secondly, you're preserving this for history that could definitely fall under CRT, definitely fall under DEI, and definitely be banned. So even that's not going to get out. So we'll be talking about Willis. Yeah, that's a problem. I do agree with you. They got to put more teeth in this stuff.
and quit using the name of our fallen ancestors only to leave us high and dry. So, and then somewhere to your statement, Cash Gains, yeah, the people were drunk, the white men were drunk. They went to the sheriffs and them said, "Hey, come on, let me deputize you, because all shit done broke loose. Let me deputize you." And so they deputized drunk folks, drunk white folks, to be specific, and then there you have it. So moving on to the next segment, the Department of Justice review, interviews with survivors and defendants, or as you were, descendants. We personally interviewed survivors named in lawsuits filed following the massacre, as well as several descendants of massacre survivors who learned about the massacre from their parents and grandparents. We also read survivor accounts about the massacre. These included a recent account co-authored by a living massacre survivor and a historical account by Mary Jones Parrish, first published in 1923, which also collected accounts of other survivors. We reviewed an account by attorney B.C. Franklin, written 10 years after the massacre, as well as the account in his autobiography. We also viewed, listened to, or read accounts of now deceased survivors who provided their recollections. These accounts are available in various collections, including the Hemlick Center for American Research, Eddie Fay Gates Collection, and Oklahoma State University's Ruth Sigler of Avery Collection. Bureau of Investigation reports. We reviewed federal reports dated June 3rd and June 6, 1921, one written by the federal agent who investigated the massacre and another by that agent's supervisor, which included the investigator's preliminary findings. We discovered these reports through ProQuest, a platform available through many public libraries, universities, and other institutions with subscriptions. The reports are also available through the National Archives, because neither the official commission report nor the leading studies of the massacre cite these reports, and because they may be important to scholars who conduct research into the massacre, we reproduce them in full at Appendix C. In addition, we review the 2 additional Department of Justice files related to the massacre, which include correspondence and secondhand witness accounts. These files are included as Appendices D and E. Oklahoma Commission report. We reviewed a report issued in 2001 by the Oklahoma Commission, created to study the massacre, then called a riot. This comprehensive report includes multiple articles with in-depth explorations of various aspects of the massacre. Primary source material. We reviewed American Red Cross reports that were written in the wake of the massacre. We reviewed the after-action reports submitted by the members of the National Guard, as well as materials related to a 1921 state grand jury investigation that led to the charges filed against the Tulsa police chief. Now, how many knew that charges were filed against the Tulsa police chief at that time? I didn't know. This is news to me. We also reviewed materials in the special collections of McFerrin Library at the University of Tulsa. These materials relate to the massacre and to the Ku Klux Klan as it existed in Tulsa in the 1920s, back when, according to Cash Gaines, prohibition was in effect. Legal pleadings. We reviewed available legal filings, including pleadings from civil lawsuits seeking insurance compensations and/or compensatory damages, which members of Greenwood's Black community filed in the wake of the massacre. We also reviewed more recent legal pleadings, such as those filed in Alexander versus Oklahoma and Randall versus City of Tulsa. Secondary sources. We read books about the massacre, examined a variety of law review articles, reviewed other scholarly publications and dissertations, viewed several documentaries, and listened to podcasts discussing the massacre. Many older materials were available from the special collections at the University of Tulsa McFerrin's Library and from the Ruth Sigler Avery Collection at Oklahoma State University. We also consulted several timelines prepared by the Commission and others describing the massacre. News articles and photographs. We obtained and read many contemporaneous news accounts published in the aftermath of the massacre. We also examined several collections of photographs taken during and after the massacre. Interviews with experts. We met with over a dozen historians, journalists, and citizens experts who have published accounts of the massacre. Those reports are attached as Appendix C. Background. This report of our review cannot accurately analyze the massacre outside the historical context in which it occurred. We therefore begin by describing the nation, state, city, and community as it existed at the time of the massacre. We also examine the effect of the First World War, which we call the Great War, as that was the term that would have been used in 1921. And let me pause here just for a brief moment. To anybody's knowledge, is this the war? Was it World War I or World War II when they said that when Black Americans over, they was over there calling Black Americans nigga? Was that World War I or was it World War II? Anybody know off the top?
And that was both.
What'd you say, Cash?
That was both. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
They the prisoner of wars, when they brought them back here in World War II, they were doing it when they brought them back here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So it's going to be referred to as the Great War because that's a term that was used in 1921. They're talking about the First World War. Let's get into it. Race relations in America at the time of the massacre. In the early 20th century America, there were multiple incidents in which white mobs attacked Black communities. In 1898, 23 years before the Tulsa Race Massacre, white supremacists violently deposed the duly elected government in Wilmington, North Carolina, because these white supremacists were upset that the government had allowed Black participation in elections and city governance. During this coup, white supremacists killed many Black people. In July 1917, 4 years before the Tulsa Race Massacre, a white mob attacked a Black community in East St. Louis, Missouri. Estimates of the death toll vary widely, but the massacre likely killed hundreds of Black residents and caused over $400,000 in property damage. 2 years later, between March and October 1919, white mobs committed assaults upon Black communities in at least 26 cities across the country. The summer was so bloody, it is remembered as the Red Summer of 1919. In 1923, 2 years after the Tulsa Race Massacre, a white mob invaded the Black community in Rosewood, Florida, where they killed at least 8 people, burned and looted homes and businesses, and drove many in the Black community out of town. Nearly all white perpetrators evaded accountability. Let me take a pause right here, right now. Shout out to Alexis, a Fisk alumni. Super duper intelligent. Happy to have you up here on the stage, Alexis. What's going on? You got it.
Oh, I think you guys had already answered the question. You were asking whether it was World War I or World War II. Definitely both wars, but this is specifically talking about World War I.
Yes.
And I was going to say that there was actually a gentleman who brought back a Gatling gun. He was a Greenwood resident, set it up on a hill to help defend against the mobs and the deputized. But that's all I wanted to say.
Awesome.
Thanks for letting me add.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that insight. Appreciate that. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, nearly all white perpetrators evaded accountability. In addition to violence targeting whole communities, there were countless examples of white mobs murdering individual Black people, a practice known as lynching. According to records kept by the Tuskegee Institute in 1921, white mobs lynched 59 Black people, which is an average of more than one lynching per week. One law professor writing about the Tulsa Race Massacre notes that at the time, lynchings, whether for white sport and family entertainment or to terrorize Black communities deemed too successful and uppity, grew not only in number, but also in ferocity. It became more vicious. Yes, Funded. You got it, sir.
Okay, since they mentioned Rosewood, was there any restitution paid out to survivors of Rosewood, and was it a state action or federal action? Since they mentioned it,
there was restitution paid to Rosewood, and at the end of the movie, they highlight that and make it very specific. And what I can try to Google it to give you access.
Miss Mel?
Yes.
I've read into that a bit. They got paid $150,000 per standing survivor. I think there were 11 of them. And any of the descendants got to go to Gainesville College, right outside of where they work, for $5,000 to $7,000 a year covered only for 4 years. So it wasn't the best.
Cash, turn your TV down because that's louder than you are, and want to hear these details that you're adding and contributing to our discussion tonight. Now, what now? Are you able to repeat what you said? I heard some of it, but I just want clarity.
Yes, ma'am. I've looked into the Rosewood reparations claim, or essentially the State Act of Atonement. I believe it happened. It started in 1994 and went all the way until 2012, 2014, or something like that. But there were 11 standing survivors who were paid $150,000 a person. Any of their descendants who were displaced by the massacre got $5,000 to $7,000 a year, covered only if they went to Gainesville College specifically, which is just outside of the Rosewood area. So it kind of relegated them to an area to only 4 years of college, and only the standing survivors got paid. I don't understand how they got paid, but they don't understand that they're standing survivors for this instance as well. So I'm glad he brought it up.
Yeah, I'm glad he brought that question up too. And and to me, that demonstrates whoever was trying to advocate for these Tulsa survivors, like they didn't even try to bring in courts that would show a precedent for making these victims whole. I mean, because look what did happen in Rosewood. So why, so just looks like poor legal work on that. Just my opinion, allegedly. But looks like poor legal work. Come on now. Anyway, Oklahoma before the massacre. During the late 19th century, Oklahoma Territory had a reputation for being welcoming to Black Americans. Some Black leaders described Oklahoma as a promised land, friendly to Black interests. Oklahoma Territory had over 50 all-Black towns, a record number for any state or territory. The amount of land owned by the Black community resulted from the way Black settlers arrived in Oklahoma. Many came to what was then Indian Territory, accompanying Native American tribes that had been expelled from the antebellum South. These tribes had previously adopted the South's slavery system and brought enslaved Black people with them when the tribes were forcibly relocated. After post-war emancipation, freedom, people formerly enslaved by the tribes received land when Congress divided communal tribal land. Some freedmen became quite wealthy. Many Black Tulsans whom we interviewed proudly identified themselves by stating their tribal affiliation in addition to their identification with Greenwood's Black community. Now, again, I'm going to stop right here because for those of us who be on these Twitter streets, we know about that discussion about the Indian and the freedmen and the this and the that. And this is truly my first time hearing this piece of freedmen history as it relates to them receiving this land. This is definitely proof that Indians had slaves or running slaves, or until just now that's been, I guess, or we don't know. But it's locked up tight in this report. Funded Social, you got it.
Okay, so on that point, the Walketeers, of course, our people were a part of that. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, they did get land. Tulsa, Oklahoma, or the Greenwood district came out of land that was given to them from the tribes. That part has been established. Mm-hmm. But what I want to say is, and this is a lesson, so they moved to this territory, and instead of concentrating in a metropolis, in other words, instead of scattering themselves out in 50 different cities across this state, if they had come together in one metropolis, and they could have had separate incorporations around each other like a lot of these northeastern cities do, they would have been stronger because they would have been in the same geographical location. They actually could have been a capital city had they simply came together instead of trying to scatter themselves even across the state. So I just want to notate that was likely a strategic error, especially when they didn't come to the aid of Tulsa during this event, after this event? Like, where was the troops to rally? They didn't show up. They were essentially on an island unto themselves at the mercy of these other people.
Okay. Word. Yeah. I don't know, and it makes it seem like, and you can help me, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can help me here, Black, because it seems like if all of them were in Greenwood, if that's where it happened, it seemed like they tried to do that concentration thing. And then my question is, were they even thinking, hey, this is a potential that could happen? Or as they said, it was welcoming, and it was friendly, and it was Mayberry RFD, and you know what I'm saying? Like, so were the residents in Tulsa, were they really taken aback? Did they even have an inkling in their mind that this kind of thing could happen? Was racism on display while they were there? That's what I wonder. Alexis, you're up. We're going to hear from you, and then you, Cash Gaines. You got it.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of time left, but thanks for letting me up on the stage again, Mel. I wanted to really just address something that Black said beforehand. I'm not going to say I'm sure that they were all, they weren't trying to locate together. Mm-hmm. But remember, when they gave out allotments of land there were oftentimes the allotments of land were so far away from the people that it was allotted to that it was given to them in hopes that they would just give it up. There was this, I can't remember her name exactly, but it was this one young, I can't remember which tribe she was from, but she's a Black American freedman. She's a freedman from that tribe. They allotted her land that was, say, maybe 50 miles away from where she was. And you can just get 50 miles very, very easily in the hopes that she would give it up. But it was on really good oil land, so she became quite wealthy from it. So that was there. The other thing is that the people in Oklahoma were very politically astute. There were a number of Black men that were going around at the time, because remember, back then, everybody Black was basically voting Republican. And they were like, hey, y'all, we cannot all vote Republican. About half of us have to be Republican. Half of us have to be Democrats, because we need to win whatever seats are available so that we can have political self-determination. So I think that they were a little more astute than maybe what we think we see when we read this. Just wanted to share that out. But a lot of times the allotments were given all over the place, depending on where the tribe owned land, and it wasn't always necessarily close by to where the people lived.
Okay, so that could have been what prevented them from being able to assemble as a collective. Okay. Cash, your hand's up, and Funded Social, Black, your hand is up too. Y'all jump on in.
Yeah, let me get away from the TV and get our name flashes.
Okay, yeah, because thank you.
I was gonna say, I'm just looking at timelines real quick and trying to put them on bullets on the timeline. Jim Crow, according to Wikipedia, started in 1880. In my mind, I've always thought of the Great Migration as a reaction to that, but it says the Great Migration started in 1916. Oscarsville, I wanted to bring into the conversation, which is the displacement of more than 1,000 Black Americans and the flooding of that town with Lake Lanier now, right? That's 1912. And even the Great Migration point, real quick, I just want to make it clear that what's happening right now overseas, there are people who are being bombed, but they're given 24 hours to move. And they're saying that that's a genocidal crime against humanity, forced migration. I've never thought of our Great Migration as that, but really it was a forced migration. We were being, ran out of our homes, eminent domain, right. The Red Summer. One other, you mentioned that we were interned. I want to say out loud that we were interned before the Japanese were here. We received reparations twice, at least in Tulsa's instance. And then there's this phenomenon that I've been looking at. And let me try to tie a line from all the way back to Tulsa. Red Summer's in 1919, and so is the end of World War I, or the Great War. Yeah. And it's been argued that a lot of people who come back from war end up becoming police. They end up going from policing people who have no rights worldwide to doing it domestically. And indeed, even in modern day times, 30% of our police force is former military. People who kick down doors, snipe people from across apartments and stuff. I don't need to get too graphic with it. Sure. But look at this last thing. There's something called the Obama effect, where a lot of white men who were tricked into believing that, Saddam Hussein and attacked Iraq and all that, and attacking brown folks, they came back to America and Obama became president and they became police officers. And so in a way that they were deputized in the same way they were back in 1919, 1920, and 1921 with the Tulsa Massacre. I see it as the exact same thing happening again. They go overseas to kill people, then they come back home and do it to their own with the techniques that they learned. Let me mention one last one. Birmingham, Alabama in the 1950s, after World War II, there was a guy who was a bombardier that came back and became a domestic terrorist, blowing up black churches with the methods he learned overseas in World War II. So we've been surviving a domestic war against people who are trained to be serial killers by the biggest government of the world and the biggest military of the world, and yet we still thrive. So thank you again for the space, and I'm listening.
No, thank you for that information. Go ahead, Fund the Social, you got it. Thank you for that highlight, Cash. Go ahead, Social, you got it.
Okay, I'll build on what Cash was saying. So I know some military folks, some Black American, current and ex-military folks, and one of the things they do try to do is get into law enforcement, but many of them are locked out. So he's right about that part where the white patriot, quote unquote, does see law enforcement as like a logical next step for them, but. At any rate, he mentioned the Great Migration. Well, there were the exodusters, which would predate the Great Migration, Kansas, Nicodemus, Indiana, which we had a whole thing about how people flooding into Indiana and all the racial violence that they were faced with in that state. And then obviously they started moving further west, Oklahoma, and eventually out to the West Coast. But the people there in Tulsa, some of them were veterans, so some of them had this training and they were prepared. There's an organization called the African Blood Brotherhood, ABB. They are out of New York City. They traveled to Tulsa a year before this mini Civil War, because that's another term that they used when they talked about this event. And they essentially went there and they had chapters all over the country. But they had essentially went there to get people trained up to be in a defensive posture and to be essentially aware of the circumstances on the ground. W.E.B. Du Bois also visited there just before this massacre, and he notated how the Negroes would only shop in their own businesses. They would not patronize white-owned establishments in that area, and he was actually blown away by the fact that they were so organized like that. So when you read the thing where it said, they put this man in prison, and then the people organized with guns to come to his aid. Yes, because they were aware and they were prepared to defend themselves.
Black, well, I tell you, whoo, thank you for that clarification. Yes, indeed. And no, thank you for that. Wow. And also, yes, what I was going to say is, because I know I read and saw that video where even during this time, Black people were hiring white folks. They had white folks coming in there cleaning for them and working for them. And so I know that had to been, they had to have been salty like a mug. Alexis, your hand is back up. What's going on?
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'll be quick to this one.
Sure.
There definitely was some economic issues that were going on, and I haven't done any research on it. I really need to, but I wanted to put it out here and see if anyone else had heard it. One of my cousins, a couple of years ago, when it was being talked about everywhere, she asserted to me in a conversation that one of the reasons why there was also a lot of angst there is that the residents of the Greenwood district were starting to try to open up some negotiations with for some economic things in Mexico, right? To get some trading done from there to bypass these white people. And that was causing a lot of angst amongst them as well.
So, and you know what? And come to think of it, I guess my question maybe should have thought a little bit deeper because as stated in this report, they were already hip to what had gone on in North Carolina, and what had happened in Wilmington wasn't no punk. They threw them folks out of office and ran them out of town. So yeah, they had to bend. These folks over here in Greenwood, they had to bend. So it seems like they were walking on faith, walking courageously, walking confidently, and clearly for them to be in talks to try to do some international business with Mexico. If you want to call it international at that time, yeah. So see, we always been represented. Let me keep going on. We're on the section of the history of Oklahoma before the massacre, and like I just read, many Black Tulsans whom we interviewed proudly identified themselves by stating their tribal affiliation in addition to their identification with Greenwood's Black community. Oklahoma did not remain welcoming to the Black community. After the Civil War, the lure of newly discovered oil fields drew white settlers to Oklahoma Territory. Many of these settlers were the children and grandchildren of the Southerners who had supported Confederate rebels during the war, and most of whom adopted their forebears' attitudes towards Black people. When Congress granted Oklahoma statehood in 1907, these white Oklahomans